The noise does not always arrive as sound. Sometimes it comes disguised as thoughts that never seem to end, as an inner pressure to figure everything out, as the feeling that life is always asking something from you, and you are always one step behind. Many people sense that something greater is trying to reach them, yet at the same time they feel unable to listen. There is a quiet intuition knocking from within, but it competes with worry, urgency, disappointment, and the habit of living on constant alert. Over time, this creates a subtle exhaustion, not of the body, but of the soul, a fatigue that no rest seems to cure. This is the moment where many begin to question whether they are disconnected from the universe, from God, or from their own essence. But what if the connection was never lost? What if it has only been covered by layers of mental noise, emotional tension, and the pressure to control outcomes? The idea of a quantum universe calling you is not about mysticism or fantasy. It is about recognizing that life responds more clearly when you are no longer forcing it to answer on your terms. When the mind relaxes its grip, something deeper begins to organize itself naturally. In this space, silence is not emptiness. Silence is presence. It is where your nervous system softens, where your emotional field stabilizes, and where intuition can finally rise without being interrupted. Intuition does not shout. It does not argue or demand. It arrives calmly, often as a simple knowing, a subtle clarity that feels grounded rather than desperate. But to perceive it, you must first learn how to quiet the internal chaos that has become familiar. This journey is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to a state that existed before fear learned to speak louder than wisdom. As you move through this experience, you are invited to slow down, to soften your attention, and to listen beyond thought. Not to escape life, but to meet it with greater alignment. The universe is not distant or silent. It has always been communicating. The real question is whether you are ready to create the inner space necessary to finally hear what has been patiently waiting for you all along. The weight of the unquiet mind. There is a particular kind of restlessness that settles in when the mind has learned to stay awake even when nothing is happening. It does not announce itself loudly. It hums beneath daily routines, fills pauses with unease, and transforms still moments into opportunities for worry. Many people have lived with this internal tension for so long that they no longer recognize it as noise. It feels normal. It feels responsible. It feels like staying prepared. Yet beneath that constant mental activity lies a subtle disconnection, a drifting away from the deeper rhythm of life. The unquiet mind is not a sign of weakness or failure. It is often the result of adaptation. At some point, staying alert felt necessary. Anticipating outcomes, replaying conversations, predicting risks, and rehearsing future scenarios became tools for survival. Over time, these tools turned into habits, and the habits into identity. The mind learned to equate control with safety. Silence began to feel unfamiliar, even threatening, because silence removed the illusion of control. This is why many people struggle when they first encounter moments of stillness. When the external world quiets, the internal world often grows louder. Thoughts rush in, unresolved emotions surface, and the body tightens as if something important has been forgotten. This reaction is not resistance to peace, but unfamiliarity with it. The nervous system has learned to associate constant mental movement with protection. Stillness feels like exposure. Yet this constant mental vigilance comes at a cost. When the mind is always scanning, evaluating, and predicting, it remains anchored in the past or projected into the future. Very little attention remains in the present moment, where intuition naturally lives. Intuition requires availability. It requires a mind that is alert but not tense, aware but not aggressive. When thoughts dominate every inner space, intuition has nowhere to land. Over time, the unquiet mind begins to shape perception itself. Situations are interpreted through the lens of fear or urgency. Neutral events feel loaded. Small uncertainties feel heavy. Decisions become exhausting because every option is analyzed through layers of imagined consequences. This creates a cycle where the mind seeks certainty, but never feels satisfied. The more it thinks, the less clarity it finds. The less clarity it finds, the more it thinks. In this state, many people search externally for answers. They look for signs, messages, confirmations, and assurances that they are on the right path. But when the inner environment is chaotic, Even clear signals become distorted. What could have been guidance becomes anxiety. What could have been intuition becomes impulse. The universe may be communicating constantly, but the receiver is overwhelmed by static. Silencing the mind is often misunderstood as stopping thought altogether. In reality, it is not about erasing thoughts, but changing the relationship with them. Thoughts lose their dominance, not when they disappear, but when they are no longer believed automatically. When awareness shifts from being inside the thought to observing the thought, space begins to open. In that space, the body relaxes, emotions soften, and perception widens. This shift does not happen through force. Attempting to control the mind through pressure only adds another layer of tension. The mind does not respond well to aggression. It responds to safety. When the body senses safety, the mind naturally slows. Breathing deepens, muscles release, attention settles. Silence emerges not as an absence, but as a gentle background presence that supports clarity. As silence becomes more familiar, something subtle begins to change. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer arrive with the same urgency. They pass through more easily. Emotional reactions lose intensity more quickly. There is a growing sense of inner space, as if life is no longer happening entirely inside the head. This space is not empty. It is alive. It carries a quiet intelligence that does not rush. Within this inner quiet, intuition becomes easier to recognize. It does not arrive as a dramatic voice or overwhelming emotion. It often comes as a calm clarity, a simple sense of alignment or misalignment. There is no need to justify it immediately. It does not demand action or explanation. It feels steady, grounded, and strangely familiar, as if remembering something long known rather than learning something new. The unquiet mind often resists this simplicity. It prefers complexity because complexity feels important. Yet intuition speaks in simplicity because truth does not require embellishment. When the mind learns to soften its grip, it begins to trust this simplicity. Decisions feel less heavy. Direction feels less forced. Life begins to feel more cooperative rather than confrontational. This is where many notice a profound shift in how reality responds. Opportunities appear without being chased. Conversations flow with less effort. Solutions emerge organically. This is not because the external world has suddenly changed, but because perception has. When the internal environment becomes quieter, sensitivity increases. Subtle cues become visible. Timing feels more natural. The sense of fighting against life begins to dissolve. The quiet mind does not make life perfect. Challenges still arise, emotions still move, uncertainty still exists. The difference is that these experiences no longer overwhelm the system. There is a stable inner ground from which to meet them. From this ground, intuition does not disappear under pressure. It remains accessible, offering guidance not as commands, but as orientation. In this way, silencing the mind is not an escape from reality. It is a return to it, a return to a state where awareness is wider than thought, where presence is stronger than fear, and where the conversation with the universe becomes clearer simply because there is finally space to listen. The emotional frequency. Every human being moves through life surrounded by invisible currents. These currents are not mystical abstractions, but emotional climates shaped by memory, belief, and repeated inner states. Long before words are spoken or decisions are made, the emotional tone within you is already interacting with the world. This tone, often described as frequency, is not something you consciously choose most of the time. It is something you sustain through habit, through unprocessed experiences, and through the way you relate to yourself when no one else is watching. Many people believe that frequency is about feeling good all the time. This misunderstanding creates frustration because life inevitably brings moments of sadness, fear, and uncertainty. When these emotions appear, people assume they have fallen out of alignment. In reality, frequency is not about avoiding emotion. It is about how emotions move through you and whether they become residents or visitors. A stable frequency does not eliminate difficulty. It allows difficulty to pass without defining the entire inner landscape. Emotional frequency is shaped less by what happens and more by what is held. Two people can experience the same event and carry completely different internal climates afterward. One contracts, reinforcing old narratives of scarcity or danger. The other feels the impact, processes the emotion, and gradually returns to a grounded state. The difference is not strength or positivity, it is coherence. It is the ability to feel without collapsing into identification. When emotions remain unprocessed, they do not disappear. They settle quietly beneath the surface, influencing perception and reaction. Over time, this creates a baseline emotional tone that feels familiar, even if it is heavy. Anxiety becomes normal. Tension becomes home. Subtle dissatisfaction becomes the background of daily life. From this place, even positive experiences can feel fleeting because the underlying frequency pulls awareness back to what is unresolved. This is where many feel stuck, not because life is stagnant, but because the internal environment resists change. The mind may desire expansion, abundance, or peace, but the emotional body remains anchored to vigilance or self-protection. This inner mismatch creates exhaustion. Effort increases, results feel inconsistent, and trust in the process weakens. It begins to feel as though the universe is withholding something, when in fact the system is simply responding to coherence rather than desire. Frequency stabilizes not through force, but through permission. Permission to feel without judgment. Permission to acknowledge inner states without immediately needing to fix them. When emotion is allowed to be felt fully, it completes its cycle. It moves, informs, and releases. When emotion is resisted or suppressed, it lingers, repeating itself in different forms. This repetition is often mistaken for fate or bad luck, when it is simply unfinished internal movement. As emotional frequency becomes more coherent, perception subtly changes. The world appears less threatening. Neutral moments feel spacious rather than empty. Silence feels supportive rather than uncomfortable. This shift does not come with fireworks. It arrives quietly, often noticed only in hindsight. Reactions soften, pauses lengthen. The urgency to control outcomes decreases. Life begins to feel less like a series of obstacles and more like a conversation. In this state, attraction is no longer about effort. It becomes a byproduct of alignment. Opportunities resonate with the internal tone being carried. Conversations unfold with ease. Timing feels less forced. This does not mean everything works perfectly. It means experiences meet you at a level that feels manageable and meaningful. Challenges still arise, but they do not destabilize the entire system. One of the most profound changes that occurs as frequency stabilizes is the restoration of trust. Trust, not as blind optimism, but as embodied knowing. A sense that even when outcomes are uncertain, the inner ground remains steady. This trust allows intuition to function more clearly, because intuition requires a stable emotional field. In a chaotic environment, intuition is drowned out. In a coherent one, it becomes a natural extension of awareness. Emotional frequency is also deeply connected to the body. The body carries memory in posture, breath, and muscle tone. When emotional states shift, the body responds. Breathing deepens, tension releases, movement becomes fluid. This physical coherence reinforces emotional stability, creating a feedback loop that supports presence. Over time, the body learns that it is safe to relax and the mind follows. Many people notice that as their internal frequency changes, their external priorities shift as well. What once felt urgent loses its grip. What once felt impossible begins to feel approachable. This is not because circumstances have dramatically altered, but because perception has expanded. When frequency changes, attention changes. When attention changes, reality appears different. This process does not require constant monitoring. In fact, excessive self-surveillance often disrupts coherence. Emotional frequency stabilizes through gentle awareness, not obsession, through honesty rather than performance, through allowing the full spectrum of human experience without collapsing into it. This is a quiet strength, one that does not announce itself, but transforms everything it touches. As emotional frequency becomes more aligned, the sense of being called by something greater no longer feels distant or abstract. It feels intimate. Life begins to respond in subtle but unmistakable ways, not because the universe has changed its behavior, but because you have changed the way you meet it. And in that meeting, something deeply restorative begins to unfold. Listening beyond thought, there is a subtle moment that many people overlook, a moment when knowing arrives before explanation. It does not announce itself with urgency, nor does it demand immediate action. It appears quietly, often in the background of awareness, like a gentle internal alignment. This is the space where intuition lives, not as a mystical event, but as a natural function of a system that has learned to listen beneath thought. Intuition is frequently misunderstood because it does not operate in the same language as the mind. The mind reasons, compares, and justifies. Intuition recognizes. It does not require a chain of logic to feel true. This difference often creates tension. When intuition speaks, the mind rushes in to interrogate it, searching for proof, guarantees, or external confirmation. In doing so, the original clarity becomes clouded, and what was once simple feels suddenly confusing. This confusion is not a failure of intuition, but a habit of mistrust. Many people were conditioned to value explanation over perception, certainty over resonance. As a result, subtle inner signals were ignored or overridden for years. Over time, this created a distance between awareness and instinct. Intuition did not disappear. It simply learned to speak more softly, waiting for moments when the internal environment felt safe enough to be heard. Listening beyond thought requires a different quality of attention. It is not sharp or forceful. It is receptive. It notices sensations, shifts in energy, and emotional responses that arise without narrative. These signals often show up in the body before they form words: a sense of expansion or contraction, a calm certainty or a quiet resistance. These sensations are not commands. They are information. When the emotional field is coherent and the mind is not agitated, these signals become clearer. They are no longer drowned out by urgency or fear. In this clarity, intuition does not compete with logic. It complements it. Decisions feel less like calculations and more like alignments. There is less internal debate and more internal agreement. This does not mean choices become easy. It means they become cleaner. One of the most important distinctions in listening beyond thought is recognizing the tone of intuition. It is steady. It does not rush. It does not threaten. Even when it points toward change, it carries a sense of groundedness. Fear, on the other hand, is sharp and repetitive. It loops, it pressures, it demands immediate resolution. Learning to feel this difference is not an intellectual process. It is experiential. It emerges through repeated moments of noticing without reacting. As this sensitivity develops, patterns become visible. Certain environments feel nourishing, others draining. Certain conversations leave a sense of clarity, others leave confusion. Certain paths feel aligned even when uncertain, others feel heavy even when promising. These perceptions are not judgments. They are feedback. They offer orientation rather than instruction. Listening beyond thought also reveals something humbling. Intuition does not always align with personal desire. Care does not exist to protect comfort or ego. Sometimes it points away from familiar paths, even those that appear successful on the surface. This can be unsettling, especially in a culture that values external validation. Yet, when intuition is honored, even difficult transitions carry a sense of integrity. There is less regret because choices were made in alignment with inner truth rather than external pressure. Over time, trusting intuition builds a different relationship with uncertainty. The future no longer needs to be fully mapped to feel approachable. There is a growing confidence in the ability to respond rather than predict. This confidence does not come from control, but from presence, from knowing that clarity will emerge when needed, not before. Listening beyond thought also changes how silence is experienced. Silence becomes informative rather than empty. In quiet moments, insights surface naturally, not as answers to forced questions, but as gentle realizations that integrate seamlessly into awareness. This is often when people report feeling guided, not by an external force, but by an inner intelligence that feels both personal and universal. This inner intelligence does not operate in isolation. It is deeply connected to the rhythms of life. When you are attuned to it, timing feels more natural. Actions unfold with less resistance. Relationships align or dissolve with less drama. This is not because life becomes predictable, but because responses become appropriate. There is less friction between inner state and outer movement. Listening beyond thought is not a destination. It is a relationship that deepens over time. There will be moments of doubt, Moments when old habits of overthinking return. These moments do not erase progress. They reveal layers still integrating. Each return to presence strengthens the connection, making intuition more accessible the next time. The sense of being called by the universe feels less abstract. The call is not dramatic or distant. It is intimate and constant. It exists in the quiet recognition of what feels true, what feels aligned, and what quietly asks for attention. When thought softens enough to listen, that call becomes unmistakable, not because it grows louder, but because everything else finally grows quiet enough to let it through. When control softens, life responds. There is a subtle shift that occurs when the need to control begins to loosen its grip. It does not feel dramatic or triumphant. In fact, it often feels unsettling at first, as if something familiar is dissolving. Control has a way of masquerading as responsibility, as preparation, as strength. Letting go of it can feel like stepping into uncertainty without armor. Yet beneath this discomfort lies a profound recalibration of how life is experienced. Control is often born from a deep desire for safety. When outcomes feel unpredictable, the mind steps in, attempting to manage every variable. This creates a sense of order, but it is fragile. The more tightly control is held, the more energy is required to maintain it. Over time, this effort becomes exhausting. Life begins to feel heavy, as if every decision carries the weight of consequence far beyond the present moment. As control softens, something unexpected happens. The nervous system begins to relax. The body no longer braces against imagined futures. Breath deepens, attention widens. In this softened state, perception becomes more accurate. Rather than reacting to projections, awareness responds to what is actually unfolding. This creates a sense of participation rather than resistance, as if life is no longer an opponent to outmaneuver. Softening control does not mean abandoning intention or discernment. It means releasing the illusion that every outcome must be managed internally before it can unfold externally. When control dominates, the mind insists on certainty before movement. When control relaxes, movement becomes possible even in uncertainty. This flexibility allows life to meet you halfway, responding to openness rather than force. In this state, effort transforms. Actions no longer arise from urgency, but from alignment. There is less pushing and more responding, less proving and more trusting. This does not eliminate challenge, but it changes the quality of engagement. Difficult moments are met with curiosity rather than panic. Setbacks are integrated rather than dramatized. Progress becomes sustainable rather than erratic. As control softens, timing begins to feel different. There is less obsession with speed and more sensitivity to rhythm. Opportunities appear when attention is available to notice them. Conversations unfold naturally, rather than being steered toward predetermined outcomes. Decisions feel less burdensome because they are not burdened with the need to guarantee the future. They are simply the next appropriate step. This shift also reveals how much energy was previously consumed by resistance. Resistance to uncertainty, resistance to vulnerability, resistance to not knowing. When that resistance fades, energy returns, creativity increases, presence deepens. There is a renewed sense of vitality that does not depend on circumstances being perfect. It arises from internal coherence rather than external control. Life responds differently to this state because interaction has changed. When control dominates, life is approached with suspicion. When control softens, life is approached with openness. This openness invites collaboration. Challenges become teachers rather than threats. Feedback is received without defensiveness. Growth feels organic rather than forced. One of the most profound effects of releasing control is the restoration of trust. Trust not as blind faith, but as embodied confidence. Confidence in the ability to navigate uncertainty. Confidence in inner guidance. Confidence that even when outcomes differ from expectations, meaning can still emerge. This trust does not eliminate disappointment, but it prevents despair. It allows adaptation without collapse. As trust deepens, the relationship with effort changes. Effort becomes precise rather than compulsive. Energy is invested where it resonates, not where it is demanded by fear. This precision creates momentum without burnout. Progress feels steady rather than frantic. There is space for rest without guilt, action without pressure. This softened state also alters how failure is perceived. Failure loses its identity as a verdict on worth. It becomes information, a signal for adjustment rather than self-condemnation. This perspective fosters resilience, allowing continued movement without the emotional paralysis that often accompanies perceived mistakes. As control releases its hold, intuition finds more room to operate. Intuition thrives in environments of trust and openness. When the mind is no longer obsessed with managing outcomes, it becomes receptive to subtle guidance. Insights arise naturally, without being summoned. Direction feels less like a demand and more like an invitation. This dynamic creates a sense of flow, not as constant ease, but as continuity. Even difficult phases feel connected to a larger movement. There is less fragmentation between effort and rest, certainty and doubt, action and reflection. Life feels integrated rather than compartmentalized. The universe does not respond to control with resistance out of punishment, but out of incompatibility. Control seeks domination. Life operates through relationship. When the posture shifts from dominance to participation, resonance replaces friction. This is not a transaction. It is a synchronization. In this synchronization, experiences begin to align with the internal state being carried, not because life is being manipulated, but because perception and response have become coherent. This coherence creates clarity. Clarity creates appropriate action. Appropriate action invites meaningful response. When control softens, the call of the universe no longer feels distant or demanding. It feels like a quiet agreement between inner readiness and outer movement. Life responds not to force, but to presence. And in that presence, something deeply human and profoundly expansive finds its way forward step by step, without the need to be pushed. A quiet return to what has always been here. As this journey comes to a close, what remains is not a technique, a promise, or a dramatic revelation. What remains is a subtle remembering. Beneath the noise of thought, beneath emotional turbulence, beneath the effort to control and predict, there has always been a deeper intelligence quietly present. It was never absent. It was simply waiting for space. When the mind softens, when emotional frequency stabilizes, and when control loosens its grip, this intelligence naturally rises into awareness. This is where life begins to feel less adversarial and more relational. The universe no longer appears as something distant that must be convinced or impressed. It feels intimate, responsive, and quietly precise, not because circumstances suddenly become perfect, but because perception becomes clearer. You begin to sense where you are aligned and where you are forcing. You recognize when something flows and when it resists, and instead of interpreting resistance as failure, you begin to read it as information. There is a deep relief in realizing that you were never meant to carry everything alone. That clarity does not come from overthinking, but from presence. That direction does not come from certainty, but from coherence. When your inner world becomes less fragmented, the outer world mirrors that integration in subtle yet meaningful ways. Choices feel cleaner, timing feels wiser. Energy is no longer wasted on internal battles that never needed to be fought. This is not the end of a process, it is the beginning of a different relationship with yourself and with life. One grounded in listening rather than demanding, in responding rather than forcing, in trusting the quiet signals that arise when you are no longer drowning them out. The universe has not been testing you. It has been inviting you to slow down, to soften, and to meet life from a place of alignment rather than urgency. And perhaps the most profound realization of all is this. The call you felt was never external. It was the part of you that remembers how to live in rhythm with what is real, present, and deeply alive. Now let this awareness linger as you reflect on one question. What might change in your life if you stopped forcing answers and began trusting the quiet clarity already moving within you? If this message resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and become part of a space dedicated to deeper understanding, presence, and inner alignment. Stay with us and continue watching on the end screen, where the next video will guide you even further into this journey of connection, coherence, and conscious living.